The wind howled like a wounded animal across the frozen landscape of northern Montana. Snow fell so thick that Tommy Chen could barely see his own hands when he pressed them against the small cabin window. At 12 years old, he had never experienced a blizzard this fierce. The glass felt ice cold against his forehead as he peered into the white chaos outside. "Emma, come look at this," he called to his 8-year-old sister, who sat huddled under 3 blankets near their small wood-burning stove. The fire had been slowly dying for the past 2 hours, and they were down to their last few pieces of firewood. Emma shuffled over in her thick wool socks, dragging her favorite stuffed rabbit behind her. Her breath came out in small white puffs even inside their cabin. "It looks scary, Tommy. When are Mom and Dad coming back?" Tommy's stomach twisted with worry. Their parents had left that morning to drive into town for supplies, promising they would return before the storm hit. But the weather had turned much worse than anyone predicted. The local radio had been crackling with emergency warnings before it went completely silent an hour ago. The cabin sat on their family's small ranch, 15 miles from the nearest neighbor. Tommy's father, David Chen, had bought the property 2 years ago, dreaming of a simpler life away from the busy city. His mother, Sarah, had been hesitant at first but grew to love the peaceful surroundings and fresh mountain air. They raised a few cattle and chickens, grew their own vegetables, and lived quietly in their little piece of paradise. But paradise had turned into a nightmare. The storm had arrived 3 hours earlier than forecasted, and with a fury that nobody expected. Tommy remembered his father checking the weather that morning, confident they had plenty of time for their supply run to town. "Just a regular winter storm," he had said, kissing both children goodbye. "We'll be back by lunch with hot chocolate and your favorite cookies." Now the sun was setting, though it was impossible to tell through the thick curtain of snow. The temperature had dropped so fast that ice was forming on the inside of their windows. Tommy could hear strange creaking sounds from the cabin's wooden frame as it battled against the powerful wind. Emma pressed closer to her brother, shivering despite her warm clothes. "My fingers are getting numb," she whispered. "And I'm really hungry." Tommy looked at their supplies. They had a half-empty box of crackers, 2 cans of soup, and some peanut butter. Their parents had taken most of their food supplies to town for restocking. The children were supposed to eat the lunch their mother had prepared, but that felt like days ago now. "Let me make us some soup," Tommy said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. He had watched his parents cook countless times, but he had never operated the propane stove by himself. His hands shook as he lit the burner and opened a can of chicken noodle soup. While the soup heated, Tommy checked their firewood supply again. Only 4 small logs remained. He knew they needed to conserve fuel, but Emma was already shivering badly. He added 1 log to the fire, hoping it would last through the night. The soup warmed them temporarily, but as darkness fell completely, the cabin grew colder and colder. Tommy found every blanket in the house and built a small fort around the wood stove where he and Emma could stay close to the remaining heat. "Tell me a story," Emma asked, her teeth chattering. "Tell me about the time Dad caught that big fish." Tommy wrapped his arms around his little sister and began the familiar tale, but his mind was racing with worry. He kept listening for the sound of their parents' truck engine, for their voices calling out that they were home safe. But all he could hear was the relentless howling of the wind and the rattling of their small cabin. Around midnight, the power went out completely. Their electric heater died, and the cabin plunged into darkness except for the dim glow from their dying fire. Tommy used his father's flashlight sparingly, knowing the batteries needed to last. Emma had fallen asleep against his shoulder, but Tommy stayed awake, feeding their last pieces of wood into the stove one by one. He tried to make each log last as long as possible, but by 3 in the morning the fire was nothing but glowing embers. The cold began creeping in like a living thing. Tommy could feel it seeping through the walls, under the doors, around the windows. He pulled Emma closer and wrapped every blanket around them both, but it wasn't enough. His sister's breathing was becoming shallow and her skin felt frighteningly cold to the touch. Tommy realized with growing terror that they were in real danger. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Their parents were trapped somewhere out in the blizzard and their cabin was becoming an icebox. He had heard stories about people freezing to death in situations like this. The thought made his heart pound with fear. As dawn approached, though no sunlight could penetrate the thick snow clouds, Tommy made a desperate decision. He couldn't just sit there and watch his sister freeze. He needed to find help somehow, even if it meant going out into the deadly storm. He remembered that their nearest neighbor, old Pete Morrison, lived about 3 miles through the woods. Pete was a retired forest ranger who knew these mountains better than anyone. If Tommy could somehow reach him, Pete would know what to do. But 3 miles through a blizzard was almost impossible for a 12-year-old boy. The snow was already several feet deep, and the wind was strong enough to knock a grown man off his feet. Still, staying in the cabin meant certain death for both of them. Tommy looked down at Emma's pale face and made his choice. He would have to try. He began gathering the warmest clothes he could find, preparing for what might be the most dangerous journey of his young life. Outside, the storm raged on with no mercy, waiting to test everything he had learned about survival and courage. The next few hours would determine whether 2 children would live to see their parents again, or become another tragic story of a winter storm that showed no mercy to the innocent. Tommy Chen stood at the cabin door, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it over the screaming wind. Emma lay bundled in every blanket they owned, her breathing weak and shallow. Her lips had turned a frightening shade of blue, and she barely responded when he shook her gently. "Emma, I have to go get help," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm going to find Pete Morrison. He'll know what to do." His sister's eyes fluttered open briefly. "Don't leave me, Tommy," she whispered so softly he almost couldn't hear her. "I'm scared. I'll be back, I promise. I'm going to save you." Tommy kissed her forehead, which felt like ice against his lips. He tucked the blankets tighter around her small frame and placed his father's hunting knife within her reach, though he doubted she had the strength to use it. Tommy had dressed in layers, 2 pairs of pants, 3 sweaters, his father's heavy winter coat that hung past his knees, thick boots, and wool gloves. He wrapped a scarf around his face until only his eyes showed, then pulled on his father's hunting cap with the ear flaps. The moment he opened the cabin door, the blizzard attacked him like a wild beast. The wind hit him so hard it nearly knocked him backward into the cabin. Snow immediately began stinging his exposed skin and finding its way into every gap in his clothing. The cold was so intense it made his lungs burn with each breath. Tommy had planned his route carefully. He would follow the creek that ran behind their cabin. Even buried under snow, he could trace its path by the line of trees that grew along its banks. The creek led directly toward Pete Morrison's property, and Tommy had walked that path many times during summer fishing trips with his father. But summer was nothing like this nightmare. The snow was already up to Tommy's chest in some places, and each step forward required enormous effort. He had to high-step through the drifts, lifting his knees almost to his waist with every movement. Within minutes, his legs ached from the exertion. The wind seemed to come from every direction at once, spinning the snow into a confusion of white that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Tommy tried to follow the tree line, but the familiar landmarks were buried and transformed. Everything looked the same, just endless white chaos. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Tommy realized he was lost. Panic rose in his throat as he looked around desperately for something familiar. The trees all looked identical, bent and heavy with snow. He couldn't see the cabin behind him anymore, and he had no idea which direction led to Pete Morrison's place. His feet were beginning to go numb inside his boots, and his fingers felt like blocks of wood even inside his thick gloves. The scarf around his face was becoming stiff with ice from his frozen breath. Tommy knew he was experiencing the early stages of hypothermia, just like Emma back in the cabin. "Help!" he tried to shout, but the wind snatched his voice away before it could travel more than a few feet. "Somebody help us!" Tommy struggled forward, choosing a direction that he hoped was correct. Every step was becoming more difficult as his energy drained away. He fell several times, disappearing completely into deep snowdrifts, then had to claw his way back to the surface with muscles that were rapidly weakening. The cold was making him drowsy, which he knew was dangerous. His father had taught him about hypothermia during their camping trips. "When you start feeling sleepy in the cold, that's when you're in real trouble," his father had said. "That's your body shutting down. You have to keep moving no matter what." But Tommy's body wanted to stop. Every instinct told him to curl up behind one of the large pine trees and wait for the storm to pass. The snow looked soft and inviting, like a white bed calling to him. He caught himself actually considering it before shaking his head violently. "Emma needs me," he said out loud, his voice muffled by the scarf. "I have to keep going." Tommy forced himself to take another step, then another. He began counting his steps to keep his mind focused. 1, 2, 3, 4. When he reached 100, he started over. The numbers became a rhythm that helped him push through the pain and exhaustion. Somewhere around his fifth set of 100 steps, Tommy thought he saw a darker shape through the snow ahead. Hope flared in his chest as he struggled toward it, but it turned out to be just a large boulder, not a building. The disappointment hit him like a physical blow. He was completely lost now, wandering in circles through a frozen wilderness that seemed to have no end. His sister was dying alone in their cabin while he stumbled around helplessly in the storm. Tommy felt tears freezing on his cheeks as despair threatened to overwhelm him. Then he heard something that made his heart leap, the distant sound of an engine. It was faint and might have been his imagination, but Tommy turned toward the sound and began pushing through the snow with renewed energy. "Over here!" he screamed with all his remaining strength. "Help! My sister is dying!" The engine sound grew, louder, and Tommy could see a faint glow of headlights cutting through the blizzard. It was moving slowly, but it was definitely real. Someone was out there in the storm, searching. Tommy waved his arms frantically and continued shouting, even though his throat was raw from the cold air. The lights seemed to be moving away from him, and panic seized him again. He couldn't let his rescue disappear into the storm. Using his last reserves of energy, Tommy began running through the deep snow toward the lights. He fell repeatedly, but kept getting up, driven by pure desperation. His sister's life depended on reaching that vehicle before it vanished into the white void of the blizzard. The engine sound was definitely getting closer now, and Tommy could make out the dark bulk of a large truck pushing through the snow. On its roof was a spinning red light, cutting through the storm like a beacon of hope. "Here!" Tommy screamed one final time, his voice breaking with emotion. "Please, my sister is freezing to death." The truck stopped and Tommy heard a door slam. A tall figure in a heavy coat came trudging through the snow toward him, moving with the confidence of someone who knew how to handle extreme weather. As the figure got closer, Tommy could see it was a man with a thick beard covered in ice. He was wearing the uniform of the local sheriff's department, and his eyes were kind but serious as he looked down at the exhausted boy. "Son, what are you doing out here?" the deputy asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. "We've been looking for you and your family for hours." Deputy Mike Rodriguez couldn't believe what he was seeing. A small boy stood waist-deep in snow, barely visible through the blizzard, his clothes covered in ice and his face red with cold. The child was shaking so violently that Mike could see it even from several feet away. "My sister," Tommy gasped, his words coming out in frozen puffs. "She's back at our cabin. She's dying. Please, you have to help her." Mike immediately radioed his partner. "Jim, I found one of the Chen kids. He's in bad shape and there's another child back at their cabin. We need the medic truck here now." Deputy Jim Walsh's voice crackled through the radio. "Copy that. Medical team is 5 minutes out. How's the boy?" "Severe hypothermia, but he's conscious and talking. Kid's been walking through this storm for God knows how long." Mike looked down at Tommy with a mixture of admiration and worry. "Son, you're one brave kid, but we need to get you warmed up right now." Mike scooped Tommy up in his strong arms and carried him to the massive sheriff's department truck. Inside, the heater was running full blast and the warmth hit Tommy like a physical force. The sudden change in temperature made him dizzy, and he began shivering even more violently. "Easy there, buddy," Mike said, wrapping Tommy in emergency blankets from the truck's first aid kit. "Your body needs time to adjust. Can you tell me exactly where your cabin is?" Tommy's teeth were chattering so hard he could barely speak. Follow the creek," he stammered. "About 2 miles upstream from where you found me. Emma can't move anymore. She's so cold." Mike was already turning the truck around, following Tommy's directions. The heavy vehicle had snow chains and 4-wheel drive, but even this powerful machine struggled against the deep drifts and fierce wind. The deputy had been driving these mountain roads for 15 years, but he had never seen a storm this brutal. "What about your parents, son?" Mike asked as he navigated carefully through the white maze. "Where are they?" "They went to town this morning for supplies," Tommy explained, his voice getting stronger as feeling returned to his body. "They were supposed to be back before the storm hit. Something must have happened to them. Mike's expression grew grim. He knew that several vehicles had been trapped or had slid off the icy roads during the storm. The State Highway Department had closed all major routes hours ago, and rescue crews were stretched thin, responding to emergencies across the county. Through his radio, Mike could hear the chatter of other emergency teams dealing with the crisis. A family was trapped in their car near Miller's Bridge. An elderly man had suffered a heart attack and couldn't be reached by ambulance. A power line had fallen across Highway 9, blocking the main rescue route. The storm was overwhelming everyone's ability to respond. There, Tommy suddenly pointed through the windshield. I can see our cabin. The small log building looked like a snow-covered island in the middle of nowhere. Mike could barely make out its outline through the blizzard, but he could see that snow had already drifted up to the windows on one side. The place looked completely dead. No lights, no smoke from the chimney, no signs of life. Mike parked as close as he could get and grabbed his emergency kit. Stay in the truck where it's warm, he told Tommy. I'm going to get your sister. I'm coming with you, Tommy said firmly. She's scared. She'll feel better if she sees me. Mike wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in the boy's eyes. This kid had already walked miles through a deadly blizzard to save his sister. He wasn't going to stay behind now. They pushed through the deep snow to the cabin door. Mike had to put his shoulder against it to force it open against the snow that had drifted against it. Inside, the cabin was dark and felt almost as cold as the outdoors. Emma, Tommy called out. Emma, I brought help. They found her exactly where Tommy had left her, buried under a pile of blankets near the cold wood stove. Mike knelt down and gently touched her neck to check her pulse. It was there, but weak and much too slow. Her skin was frighteningly pale and her breathing was shallow. She's in severe hypothermia, Mike said grimly into his radio. We need that medical team at the Chen cabin immediately. The girl is unconscious and barely breathing. Mike had basic medical training, but he knew this was beyond his abilities. He carefully lifted Emma, blankets and all, and carried her out to his truck. Tommy followed close behind, his face tight with worry. In the truck, Mike cranked the heater even higher and began the delicate process of trying to warm Emma without shocking her system. He knew that rewarming a hypothermia victim too quickly could cause dangerous heart rhythms or even cardiac arrest. Come on, sweetheart, he murmured to the unconscious girl. Stay with us. Your brother walked through hell to get you help. Tommy sat beside his sister, holding her cold hand and talking to her quietly. I told you I'd come back, Emma. I told you I'd find help. You're going to be okay now. Through the storm, they could see the flashing lights of the medical response truck approaching. The vehicle was larger than Mike's truck, equipped with advanced heating systems and medical equipment specifically designed for cold weather emergencies. Dr. Sarah Kim jumped out of the medical truck almost before it stopped moving. She was a wilderness medicine specialist who had been called in from the county hospital, specifically for this storm emergency. Behind her came two paramedics carrying warming blankets and medical equipment. How long has she been like this? Dr. Kim asked as she immediately began checking Emma's vital signs. We don't know exactly, Mike replied. The boy says their parents left this morning before the storm hit. He's been taking care of his sister alone all day and most of the night. Dr. Kim looked at Tommy with amazement. You kept her alive, young man. If you hadn't come for help when you did, we would have been too late. The medical team worked quickly to stabilize Emma. They wrapped her in specially designed warming, blankets that used battery-powered heating elements to gradually raise her body temperature. They started an IV to provide warm fluids and began monitoring her heart rhythm carefully. Her core temperature is dangerously low, Dr. Kim explained to Tommy, but she's responding to treatment. You saved your sister's life by getting help when you did. As they prepared to transport both children to the hospital, Mike received an update on his radio that made his heart sink. The search teams had found the Chen parents' truck in a ditch about 5 miles outside of town. The vehicle had slid off the icy road during the storm and was buried under several feet of snow. The rescue was far from over. Now they had to save the parents too if it wasn't already too late. The medical truck raced through the storm toward the county hospital, its powerful engine fighting against the wind and snow that seemed determined to stop them. Inside, Dr. Sarah Kim worked steadily to bring Emma's body temperature back to normal, while monitoring every vital sign. Tommy sat beside his sister, holding her hand and watching the numbers on the medical equipment that Dr. Kim explained to him. Emma's heart rate was slowly improving and her breathing was getting stronger. The special warming blankets were doing their job, but the process had to be careful and gradual. Is she going to be okay? Tommy asked for the 10th time, his voice still shaky from his own experience with the cold. She's a fighter, just like her big brother, Dr. Kim said with a reassuring smile. Her body temperature is coming up steadily. You got to her just in time. Deputy Mike Rodriguez was coordinating the rescue efforts through his radio while following the medical truck in his patrol vehicle. The news about the Chen parents weighed heavily on his mind. Search and rescue teams were heading to the location where their truck had been found, but conditions were making it nearly impossible to reach them quickly. Unit 7 to base. Mike spoke into his radio. How's the situation with the parents' vehicle? Not good, Mike, came the reply from dispatch. The truck is completely buried and we can't get heavy equipment through these roads. The snowplow got stuck trying to clear a path. We're going to have to go in on foot with the search team. Mike knew what that meant. In these conditions, a rescue on foot could take hours, and people trapped in a car during a blizzard like this might not have hours to spare. He pressed harder on the accelerator, determined to get the children to safety so he could join the search for their parents. At the hospital, the emergency room was already busy with storm-related injuries and emergencies. Dr. Kim and her team rushed Emma directly into a trauma bay, equipped with advanced warming equipment. Tommy was taken to an adjacent room where nurses began treating his own hypothermia and checking for frostbite. Your fingers and toes look good, Nurse Janet Martinez told Tommy as she examined his extremities. No frostbite, which is amazing considering what you've been through. You must have kept moving the whole time. Tommy barely heard her. His attention was focused on the activity in his sister's room, where a team of doctors and nurses worked to stabilize her condition. Through the glass partition, he could see Emma lying very still on the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped and hummed. Dr. Kim came out to update Tommy after an hour of intensive treatment. Emma is doing much better, she said, sitting down beside him. Her body temperature is almost back to normal, and all her vital signs are stabilizing. She's going to make a full recovery. Relief flooded through Tommy's body like warm water. Can I see her? Of course. She's been asking for you. Tommy hurried into Emma's room and found his sister awake, though still very pale and weak. Her eyes lit up when she saw him and she managed a small smile. You came back, she whispered. You promised you would and you did. I told you I would save you, Tommy said, taking her hand. I wasn't going to let anything happen to you. Emma squeezed his hand weakly. Where are Mom and Dad? Are they here? Tommy's smile faded. He looked at Dr. Kim, who nodded encouragingly. They're still coming, Emma. The storm is really bad, so it's taking them longer to get here. Before Emma could ask more questions, Deputy Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. His expression was serious, and Tommy immediately knew something was wrong. Kids, I need to talk to you about your parents, Mike said gently, pulling up a chair. We found their truck and we have teams trying to reach them right now. But I want you to know that we're doing everything we can. Are they hurt? Emma asked, her voice trembling. We don't know yet, Mike answered honestly. Their truck slid off the road during the storm and got buried in snow. But your parents are smart and strong people. They know how to survive in cold weather. Tommy felt a chill that had nothing to do with his recent exposure to the blizzard.
How long have they been trapped?
Probably since this morning, shortly after they left your cabin. The storm hit earlier and harder than anyone expected. Dr. Kim placed a comforting hand on Tommy's shoulder. The rescue teams are very experienced and they have the best equipment available. Don't give up hope. But Tommy knew the reality of the situation. He had experienced firsthand how brutal the cold could be. If his parents had been trapped in their truck for nearly 24 hours in this weather, they were in serious danger. I want to help with the search, Tommy said suddenly. I know these mountains better than anyone. I can help them find the truck. Absolutely not, Mike said firmly. You've been through enough, son. You need to stay here and recover, and your sister needs you with her. But they might be lost out there. I know every trail, every creek, every landmark. I could make the difference. Mike admired the boy's courage, but he couldn't allow a 12-year-old to go back out into the storm, even if he was familiar with the area. Tommy, you've already been a hero today. You saved your sister's life. Now let the professionals do their job. Meanwhile, 5 miles away, the search and rescue team was struggling through chest-deep snow toward the location where the Chen family truck had been spotted. Team leader Captain Jake Morrison, who happened to be old Pete Morrison's son, led a group of 6 experienced rescuers equipped with emergency medical supplies and warming equipment. The storm was finally beginning to weaken slightly, but visibility was still very poor. The rescue team used GPS coordinates and emergency beacons to navigate toward the trapped vehicle, but progress was painfully slow. "There," shouted rescuer Amanda Foster, pointing through the swirling snow. "I can see something dark up ahead." The team pushed forward with renewed energy and found the Chen family's pickup truck buried up to its windows in a massive snowdrift. The vehicle had slid off the road and down a small embankment, where it had been completely covered by the blowing snow. Captain Morrison immediately began digging toward the driver's side door, while his team members attacked the snow from different angles. They had to work carefully to avoid causing a cave-in that could make the situation worse. "Hello," Morrison called out as he dug. "Can anyone hear me? This is search and rescue." From inside the buried truck came a faint tapping sound, the universal signal that someone was alive and conscious inside. The rescue team worked even faster, knowing that every minute counted in the race to save 2 more lives. Captain Jake Morrison's shovel struck the metal of the truck's door handle after 20 minutes of frantic digging. Snow had packed so tightly around the vehicle that it was like digging through concrete, but the rescue team worked with the efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this kind of emergency. "We're almost through," Morrison called out, hoping the people inside could hear him. The tapping from within the truck had continued sporadically, which meant at least one person was still conscious and aware enough to respond. Rescuer Amanda Foster had cleared enough snow from the passenger side to peer through the window. What she saw made her heart race with concern. 2 figures sat motionless in the front seats, covered with blankets and leaning against each other. Their breath was visible in small clouds, which meant they were still alive, but they weren't moving. "I can see them," Foster called out. 2 adults both appear unconscious but breathing. "We need to get them out immediately." The team redoubled their efforts, and within minutes they had cleared enough snow to open the driver's side door. A blast of frigid air escaped from the truck's interior, along with the faint smell of the wool blankets that David and Sarah Chen had wrapped around themselves. Morrison carefully checked the pulse of David Chen, who was behind the wheel. "Pulse is weak but steady," he reported into his radio. "Male victim appears to be in moderate hypothermia, conscious but unresponsive to verbal stimuli." Sarah Chen was in worse condition. She had lost consciousness hours ago and was barely breathing. Foster immediately began emergency warming procedures while Morrison carefully extracted David from the driver's seat. "Sarah," David mumbled weakly as the rescuers worked on him. "Is Sarah okay? And the kids?" "We have to get home to the kids." "Sir, your children are safe," Morrison told him firmly. "They're at the county hospital and they're both going to be fine. Your son Tommy is a real hero. He walked through the storm to get help for his sister." David's eyes opened wider and he tried to sit up. "Tommy did what?" "He went out in this storm." "Easy there," Foster said, wrapping warming blankets around him. "Your boy saved his sister's life. Now we need to focus on getting you and your wife to the hospital." The rescue team had brought a specialized medical sled designed for transporting patients through deep snow. They carefully moved Sarah onto the sled first, as she was in the most critical condition. Her body temperature was dangerously low and she needed immediate hospital care. David insisted on walking, despite his weakened condition. "I can make it," he said through chattering teeth. "I need to get to my children." The journey back to the rescue vehicles took over an hour. The team had to take frequent breaks to check on Sarah's condition and to help David when his strength failed him. The storm was finally beginning to subside, but the snow was still falling steadily and the wind remained fierce. Back at the hospital, Tommy and Emma waited anxiously for news. Emma was feeling much stronger after several hours of warming treatment, but both children were worried sick about their parents. Dr. Kim had explained that hypothermia could be very serious in adults, especially after prolonged exposure. "Will they be okay?" Emma asked Tommy for the 100th time. She was sitting up in her hospital bed now, looking much more like her normal self. "They have to be," Tommy replied, though his own worry was evident in his voice. "Dad always said that Mom is the toughest person he knows, and Dad knows everything about surviving outdoors." Deputy Rodriguez appeared in the doorway with news that made both children's hearts leap. "They found your parents," he announced with a big smile. "They're alive and they're on their way here right now." Tommy and Emma both burst into tears of relief. Emma tried to get out of bed to hug her brother, but the nurses gently insisted she stay put until the doctors cleared her for movement. "How are they?" Tommy asked, wiping his eyes. "Are they hurt?" "They're both suffering from hypothermia, like you two were," Mike explained. "Your mother is in worse shape than your father, but the rescue team says they both responded well to warming treatment. Your dad was awake and talking the whole way here." An hour later, the ambulance arrived at the hospital with David and Sarah Chen. David was able to walk into the emergency room with assistance, but Sarah was wheeled in on a stretcher, still unconscious but with stable vital signs. The moment David saw his children, he broke down crying. Despite his own exhaustion and the fact that he was wrapped in emergency blankets, he rushed to their bedside and pulled them both into a careful hug. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry we left you alone. We tried to get back, but the road conditions got so bad so fast. Our truck started sliding and we couldn't control it." "It's okay, Dad," Tommy said, hugging his father tightly. "We knew you would come back if you could. And we're all safe now." Emma was crying too, but they were tears of happiness. "Tommy saved me, Dad. He went out in the storm to get help even though it was really scary." David looked at his son with a mixture of pride and amazement. "You did that? You went out in that blizzard by yourself?" "I couldn't just let Emma freeze," Tommy said simply. "I had to do something." Dr. Kim joined the reunion and gave David an update on everyone's condition. "Your son showed incredible courage and good judgment," she told him. "If he had waited even another hour to go for help, we might not have been able to save Emma. And by going for help when he did, he also saved you and your wife, because we were able to mobilize the search team much earlier." David shook his head in wonder. 12 years old, he murmured. "My 12-year-old son saved our whole family." The medical team was working on Sarah in the next room, and after 2 hours of intensive treatment, she finally regained consciousness. Her first words were, "Where are my babies?" When she was reunited with Tommy and Emma, Sarah couldn't stop crying and hugging them. "I was so scared we would never see you again," she whispered. "When our truck went off the road and we got trapped, all I could think about was how cold you must be in that cabin." "Tommy took care of me," Emma said proudly. "He made me soup and kept the fire going, and then he went to find help when I got too cold." Sarah looked at her son with tears streaming down her face. "You're not my little boy anymore," she said. "You're a young man who saved his family." The hospital staff had set up a special family room where all 4 Chen family members could stay together while they recovered. Local news crews were already calling the hospital, wanting to interview the boy who had walked through a deadly blizzard to save his sister. But Tommy wasn't interested in talking to reporters. He was just happy to have his family together and safe. The ordeal had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. But for now, all that mattered was that everyone had survived. As the family settled in for their first night of recovery, Tommy looked out the hospital window at the storm that was finally beginning to calm. The snow was still falling, but the wind had died down significantly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they figured out how to get home and repair the damage from their ordeal. But tonight, the Chen family was warm, safe, and together. Tommy had learned that sometimes being brave meant doing the scariest thing imaginable, because someone you love depends on you. He had walked into a deadly storm as a frightened child and emerged as someone who understood what it truly meant to be responsible for others. Emma fell asleep holding both her parents' hands, and David and Sarah took turns watching over their children with a new appreciation for how precious and fragile their family bond really was. The blizzard had tested them all, but it had also shown them the incredible strength that comes from love and determination. Outside, the rescue teams were still working to help other families affected by the storm, but the worst was finally over. The Chen family's story of survival would become legendary in their small mountain community, a testament to the power of courage, love, and the unbreakable bonds between family members. 3 days after the blizzard finally ended, the Chen family was ready to leave the hospital, but they faced a new problem. The roads to their remote cabin were completely impassable, blocked by massive snowdrifts and fallen trees. The storm had dumped over 4 feet of snow in some areas, and it would be weeks before regular vehicles could reach their home. Tommy stood at the hospital window, looking out at the brilliant blue sky that had replaced the gray storm clouds. The sun was shining for the first time in days, making the snow-covered landscape sparkle like millions of diamonds. It was beautiful, but he knew that beauty hid the reality of how dangerous their situation still was. "How are we going to get home?" Emma asked from her wheelchair. The doctors wanted her to avoid walking long distances for a few more days, while her body fully recovered from the hypothermia. Dr. Kim had been working with local emergency services to find a solution. Their cabin was too remote for snowplows to reach quickly, and the family needed to get home to check on their livestock and assess the damage to their property. "I have some good news," Dr. Kim announced as she entered their room with a man Tommy didn't recognize. "This is Captain Steve Harrison from the Montana National Guard. He has a solution to your transportation problem." Captain Harrison was a tall, weathered man with kind eyes and a confident manner. He wore the uniform of a helicopter pilot, and his presence immediately gave Tommy hope. "The National Guard has been conducting rescue operations throughout the region," Captain Harrison explained. "We've been using our helicopters to reach isolated families and assess damage in areas that can't be reached by ground vehicles. We can give you a ride home in our helicopter." Emma's eyes widened with excitement. "A real helicopter? I've never been in a helicopter before." "It's going to be quite an adventure," Captain Harrison said with a smile. "But I have to warn you, the flight might be a little bumpy. The mountain winds can be tricky, even on a clear day like this." Tommy felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. After everything they had been through, flying home in a military helicopter seemed almost unreal. But he was eager to see their cabin and check on the animals they had left behind during the storm. David was worried about what they might find when they got home. "Captain, have your crews seen our property during their flights? Do you know if our cabin survived the storm?" "I've flown over your area several times," Harrison replied. "Your cabin appears to be intact, though it's partially buried in snowdrifts. I did see some of your livestock in the shelter you built for them. They seem to have weathered the storm pretty well." This news brought visible relief to both David and Sarah. They had been worried sick about their cattle and chickens, which represented not just their livelihood, but animals they cared about deeply. An hour later, the Chen family stood on the hospital's helicopter landing pad, watching as the massive military helicopter approached. The aircraft was much larger than Tommy had expected, painted in army green with Montana National Guard written in large letters on its side. The helicopter landed with a thunderous roar of engines and whipping rotor blades that sent snow flying in all directions. Captain Harrison helped the family aboard, making sure everyone was securely strapped into their seats and had proper hearing protection. "Everyone ready?" Harrison asked through the intercom system as he performed his pre-flight checks. Tommy looked around at his family, his father holding his mother's hand. Emma pressed against the window with excitement despite her nervousness, and everyone wearing the heavy headsets that allowed them to communicate over the noise of the helicopter. "Ready?" Tommy said, and he realized he truly meant it. After walking through a deadly blizzard to save his sister, riding in a helicopter seemed almost easy by comparison. The aircraft lifted off smoothly, rising above the hospital and giving them their first aerial view of the storm's aftermath. The landscape below looked like a different world from the one they remembered. Everything was buried under a thick blanket of pure white snow, with only the tops of trees and the roofs of buildings visible. "Look at that," Sarah said, pointing to a section of forest where dozens of trees had been snapped in half by the weight of ice and snow. "I've never seen anything like it." As they flew over the town, they could see the massive cleanup effort underway. Snowplows worked around the clock to clear the main roads, and crews were working to restore power lines that had been brought down by the storm. Emergency vehicles were everywhere, still responding to calls for help from people affected by the blizzard. The storm affected over 200 square miles, Captain Harrison explained through the intercom. "We've rescued 43 people from various situations, some trapped in cars, others stranded in remote locations like your family. But your situation was unique because of how young Tommy here took charge and saved everyone." Tommy felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment at the praise, but he also felt a quiet pride in what he had accomplished. He had discovered something important about himself during those terrifying hours in the storm, that he was capable of much more than he had ever imagined. As they flew deeper into the mountains toward their home, the landscape became even more dramatic. The helicopter followed the path of the creek that Tommy had used to navigate during his desperate journey to find help. From the air, he could see exactly how far he had traveled and how close he had come to getting completely lost in the wilderness. "There's where I found you," Captain Harrison pointed to a clearing near a cluster of pine trees. "Amazing that you made it that far through the storm." Emma squeezed Tommy's hand. "My brother is the bravest person in the world," she said through the intercom, loud enough for everyone to hear. Tommy looked down at the snowy wilderness below and thought about that night when he had struggled through the drifts, exhausted and scared but determined to save his sister. It felt like a lifetime ago, even though it had only been 3 days. "There's your cabin," Captain Harrison announced as they crested a ridge and their home came into view. The sight took their breath away. Their small log cabin looked like a tiny toy house in an ocean of white. Snow had drifted against one side of the building almost to the roof line, and their normally familiar surroundings were transformed into an alien landscape of sculpted snowdrifts and ice-covered trees. But it was still their home, and it was still standing. After everything they had been through, seeing that sturdy little cabin waiting for them felt like the most beautiful sight in the world. The helicopter landed in the open field behind their cabin, its powerful rotors blowing snow in every direction and creating a temporary blizzard of its own. Captain Harrison kept the engines running while the Chen family quickly unloaded their few belongings and medical supplies the hospital had sent with them. "Are you sure you'll be okay out here?" Harrison asked David as they prepared to say goodbye. "The roads won't be clear for at least another week, maybe longer." "We'll be fine," David assured him. "We have enough supplies to last until the roads open, and our neighbors will check on us once they can get through. Thank you for everything you've done for our family." The pilot shook hands with each family member, but he spent an extra moment with Tommy. "You know, son, what you did during that storm was remarkable. I've been flying rescue missions for 20 years, and I've never heard of anyone your age showing that kind of courage and determination." Tommy felt proud but also humble. "I just did what I had to do for my sister." "That's exactly what makes it so special," Harrison replied. "Real heroes don't think about being heroic. They just do what needs to be done." The helicopter lifted off and disappeared over the mountain ridge, leaving the Chen family alone in their snow-covered world. The silence after the roar of the aircraft was almost overwhelming. Just the gentle whisper of wind through the trees and the distant lowing of their cattle. Their first priority was checking on the animals. David and Tommy trudged through the deep snow to the barn and livestock shelter, while Sarah and Emma went into the cabin to assess the damage there. "The animals are all here and they look healthy," David called out with relief after counting their small herd of cattle. "The shelter held up perfectly and they still have hay and water. The chickens had fared well too, staying warm in their insulated coop." Tommy scattered feed for them while his father checked that their water system hadn't frozen. The animals seemed happy to see their humans again after several days of uncertainty. Inside the cabin, Sarah and Emma found that the interior had stayed relatively warm despite the dead fireplace. The thick log walls and good insulation had protected the inside from the worst of the cold. Some pipes had frozen, but there didn't appear to be any serious damage. "Look," Emma said, pointing to the pile of blankets where she had been lying when Tommy left to find help. "I can see exactly where I was when I thought I was going to freeze." Sarah hugged her daughter tightly. The sight of that makeshift nest of blankets brought back all the terror and helplessness she had felt when she realized her children were trapped alone in the storm. That evening, the family gathered around a roaring fire in their wood stove. David had managed to get their generator running, so they had electricity again for the first time since the storm began. The familiar sounds and smells of their home felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. "I want to hear the whole story," Sarah said as they sat down to their first home-cooked meal in days. "From the beginning, what happened after we left that morning?" Tommy and Emma took turns telling their parents about those terrifying hours when they were alone in the freezing cabin. Emma described how scared she had been when the fire died out and how Tommy had taken care of her. Tommy talked about his decision to go for help and his journey through the blizzard. "I was so scared I was going to get lost and never find anyone," Tommy admitted. "There were times when I wanted to just give up and wait for someone to find me. But I kept thinking about Emma back here getting colder and colder." David listened with amazement and pride. "You know, Tommy, what you did took more than just courage. You had to think clearly under pressure, make good decisions, and keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. Those are the qualities of a real leader." Over the following days, as they waited for the roads to be cleared, the Chen family settled into a new routine. The storm had changed all of them in different ways. Emma was more confident and less afraid of being alone. Sarah and David had a renewed appreciation for how strong and capable their children were. But Tommy had perhaps changed the most. The experience had shown him that he was capable of taking responsibility for others and making life or death decisions. He moved through their daily routines with a new sense of purpose and maturity that his parents couldn't help but notice. A week later, the county snowplows finally broke through to their road. The first vehicle to reach their cabin wasn't an emergency truck or a delivery van. It was Deputy Mike Rodriguez, coming to check on the family he had helped rescue. "How's everyone doing?" Mike asked as he stepped out of his patrol car. "I've been worried about you folks being stuck out here." "We're doing great," Emma called out from where she was helping Tommy feed the chickens. "Tommy taught me how to take care of the animals, and Mom taught us both how to cook on the wood stove." Mike smiled at the obvious pride in her voice. This little girl had been near death just a week ago, and now she was full of energy and confidence. "Tommy, can I talk to you for a minute?" Mike asked. They walked a short distance from the cabin, and Mike turned to face the boy who had impressed him so much during the storm. "I wanted you to know that your story has been in all the local newspapers," Mike said. "People are calling you a hero, and they're right. But I also wanted to ask you something. Have you ever thought about what you want to do when you grow up?" Tommy considered the question seriously. "I used to think I might want to be a teacher or maybe work with computers. But after what happened during the storm, I think I'd like to help people the way you helped us. Have you thought about law enforcement, or maybe search and rescue work? We need people who can stay calm under pressure and make good decisions when other people's lives are at stake." Tommy looked back at his cabin, where his family was going about their daily routines, safe and happy. He thought about that night when he had walked through the deadly storm, driven by love for his sister and determination to save her life. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I'd like that. I'd like to help families the way you helped ours." Mike nodded with satisfaction. "Well, you've got a few years to think about it. But if you ever want to visit the sheriff's department or ride along on patrol when you're older, just give me a call." As Deputy Rodriguez drove away, Tommy stood in the snow, looking at his home and his family. The storm had tested all of them in ways they never could have imagined. But it had also shown them what they were truly capable of when they needed to protect the people they loved. The massive Apache helicopter that had brought them home was long gone, but its roar still echoed in Tommy's memory. That sound had represented hope and rescue, and the knowledge that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. But the most important lesson he had learned was simpler than that. Sometimes the help you need most comes from within yourself, from finding the courage to do what seems impossible, because someone you love is depending on you. Emma ran up to him and took his hand. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Tommy smiled down at his little sister, remembering how pale and still she had looked when he thought he might lose her forever. "I'm thinking about how lucky we are," he said. "All of us. We're lucky to be alive, lucky to be together, and lucky to know how strong we can be when we need to be." The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful and peaceful, and it was home. After everything they had been through, there was no place on earth the Chen family would rather be.